one of the workshops I went to one time, the presenter said, if you had to pick one word to describe who you are, what would that word be? Like, it was such a frustrating workshop because no word we used was what he was looking for. And then the tension was rising, and I could see that people were going to leave because he wasn't getting to his point, and he let us just stew in the tension that we had. It was actually worse, even though we were talking and all trying to brainstorm and come up with the right idea, and he would just say no. And so in our group, I remember we were frustrated, and a guy said, I can't believe I paid money for a workshop in which I'm not learning anything in the first hour. Usually in that first hour, the presenter does her best, so he keeps you thinking, I'm going to just stick this out because maybe it will get better. But if you start with your worst, well, what's the point of hanging around? And that was starting to go that direction in our group. And I was intrigued because I like a good challenge, and I kept throwing out words. And if I used one word to describe myself, I at the time I was a young pastor, so I said studious, and that wasn't the word. And I tried to find the word that would best describe me as a pastor. He kept saying no, no, no. And I thought it was actually worse than my sociology professor in college who came in, sat down at the desk, did a little work, then he got up and he sat on the desk looking out at all of us and didn't say a word. And we all just sat there waiting for him to talk. And like 15 minutes later, a guy in the back slams his books down, starts loading up his backpack, and walks past this instructor and says, this is a waste of my money. And then the instructor talked. And it was a communications class, actually. That's what it was. And he was speaking about how some of the most difficult forms of communication involve silence. Well, in this other thing that this therapist was working at, he finally came and he said, the verb that we're looking for is be. The verb of being. God's name is I am. And we are created in the image of God. So the verb, the proper verb that describes us, is the verb of being, to be. And that's important because understanding that we are created for the moment. Not I was, not I will be, but I am. And so when I think of these two foundational feeling words, one of fear and one of God, fear and love, then, and I've mentioned already the positive use of fear, and the negative use of fear is where we set something else up before God. When our fear is not of God and of wonder and awe and worship, but our fear is placed on the car in front of us who just hit their brakes because we were following too close. That kind of fear. The kind of fear that interrupts when you're walking quietly down the street and somebody pulls up, friend or foe, and lays on the horn. and we jump, and we're ready to fight or flight. That's the negative use of fear, even though one would argue that we were designed that way. But in the garden, there wasn't supposed to be that type of fear. In the garden, we were to walk with God as Adam and Eve did, and to love God, and to fear God, and to worship, and to have wonder at the creation that God had given. So here we have this idea of the negative use of fear is when we fear something else other than God. And when we do that, our lives become a wreck and a mess. And if you're saying, well, I worship someone other than Jesus Christ, that's idolatry, and that type of idolatry will cause great trouble in your life today, not just in eternity. We haven't gone to eternity in this discussion. We're talking about today. And so that's the negative. What does the positive view of love? Well, I mentioned it as the idea of being protected and provided for. How does me loving God become one in which I love the Lord my God with all my heart, my soul, and my body? What does that mean? But to be completely dependent on God for all my needs. Being dependent on God for all my struggles in life. That's the really hard one, by the way. Like growing up, when you did me wrong, I didn't just get even, I got worse. That's the motto I live by. I struggled. When people rejected me, I found a way to get back so that it felt good. I remember my confirmation pastor. He and I didn't get along at all. And when he left, we were on a hayride, and it was traditional growing up on our hayrides to throw people off of the hayride, whether it was a sled or a wagon, we were throwing people. Now, obviously, in the Duluth area, when you're doing that in the wintertime, there's usually enough snow to break your fall. But in the summertime or in the fall, well, there's a lot less snow. It's maybe some mud, but it could be some hard things. And so Pastor, he didn't come back to where we were. He stayed up front, and there was a rule: if you were up front, nobody could lay a hand on you. And I thought it was rather cowardly of him, because I finally thought I would get my chance. But he played it safe, and when he got done, we all went in to say goodbye to him and shake hands. And I went out, and because it was pulled by horses, I found a fresh pile of manure. And I grabbed it with my hand and stuck my right hand behind my back. And when I got up to Pastor, he stuck out his hand and he said, "Peace?" And I said, "Sure, I'll give you a piece." And I grabbed his hand. And he reacted strongly, because he didn't like having anything to do with manure. But from an emotional perspective in my life, my life had a lot of manure in it. And there's two things about manure that I always feel people should think about. Manure used in the bad way as it stinks. And even when you wash your hands, you can get a little bit under your fingernails. I don't know what, it sticks, the smell of it sticks to your hand. And you can fret on that, but if you use manure in the good way, it can be fertilizer. And the same thing is in your life. You can let manure in your life stick to you and stink and mess your life up. Or you can let the manure in your life be utilized in such a way to help you grow and to become that person that God desires for you to be, so that you get a chance to move on from those hard times in your life and redefine them, re-understand them. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a pastor. I study theology. And I believe that everyone's a theologian, and some things about their theology are in line with Scripture. And for many of us, we have parts of our life in which our theology may be in our heads, but it's not in our hearts. And Jesus once said, it's not what comes out of your mouth or what goes into your mouth that defiles you, but what comes out of your heart that defiles you. And so that's the practical application of a belief system. So as we continue our conversations about belief systems, we're going to dig in sometimes, and it's going to feel messy and smelly, like manure. But it's necessary to do that so we can get to a point where we can use manure in a proper way. To love God in the positive way is not to protect and provide God for God, because God doesn't need my protection or provision, but what God requires of me is dependency. He wants me to be totally dependent on Him. But I find myself not being dependent on God, and then I instead put my dependency on others or in others. And when you do that, I will guarantee you that those others will fail you, because they're human and because they are sinners. And so when we look at the positive use of love, we are fully dependent on God. And when we look at the negative use of love, we project our dependency onto finite beings or things or addictions, seeking the perfection and only finding that we're coming up short.